All right, so here we go. We're going to get started on the first step of this tutorial, project setup. If you look at this URL, jetbrains.com, PyCharm guide, tutorials, rag, blah, 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 you'll see each one of these steps has a narrated video followed by a discussion that has working code and steps that go along each part of it. I have done the part, so you don't have to sit around and wait. I've done the part where I ran create React app with passing the flag on TypeScript already. And I've opened into WebStorm, and here's what you get. Hey, you're the WebStorm audience. I don't have to, like I did with the other IDEs, give you the slow lane version of React is a blah, 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 and package.json is a blah, blah, blah. So you're familiar with this. We have a project. We have a React project with the package.json. What can we do with this? Well, we can fire up the dev server by using the run script for start, using it from the built-in terminal, and that will build up the universe, and it will open in the web browser the URL for the dev server, and we see the UI that React gives us, and that's great. And I can do the normal React stuff like making a change, saving it, things rebuild, and I go back to the browser, hit reload. If I was on a bigger screen, I would have the two of these, Chrome and the IDE side by side. Now, you may say to yourself, hey, this is WebStorm. We're smarter than running things in a terminal. And you're right. We've got multiple ways to do a better job than this. I'll shut this down here. I'll close the terminal. I could open the NPM tool window. And what it's going to do is give me a browsable version of the scripts that are available in my package.json, and I could run start. But that's not actually the way I do it anymore, because the WebStorm team has done something really cool, this thing. So I always go to my package.json, find the script I want, and when I click on it, I now have two options. I love using the debugger, so it's handy for me to use package.json to run the scripts. Instead of running them in the terminal, it runs them in a tool window, the run tool window, which has all the cool things like clickable links that I like to have versus the terminal and tracebacks and all that other kind of stuff. What does Create React give us out of the box? For one, it gives us an ever-changing target for writing tutorials. So this is a little bit different than it was when I wrote this tutorial. My apologies. I intend after this release cycle to update the tutorials to use the latest and greatest, especially different in TypeScript with the change from TSLint to ESLint, the change from class-based components to functional components. So I've got some cleaning up to do. But anyway, this is the package.json. It has the dependencies. It has the development dependencies. Actually, it doesn't. Why does it not need the list of development dependencies? Because it moves a lot of that stuff over into the Create React app world, and they manage all that stuff for us. So with all that configuration moved over to Create React app, I don't have to deal with the craziness of the ever-changing JavaScript landscape and React landscape, where this version of that version and the other version doesn't quite work together. If I'm staying with Create React app, I know that they will give me something that works. I'm running the development server with the start script. What does the development server mean? Well, everything is done in memory. There are no output files written to disk. And when the whole tool chain runs, and it goes from me typing an exclamation point into the TypeScript compiler and the Webpack bundler and the dev server and all those other things, everything is in memory. What happens? What do I do when I want to deploy this to a server? It's the build script that builds a hyper minified, teeny tiny little output version of the universe. So the build script's going to run depending on the size of your project. It might take a little while. It will create a directory called build at your root level. And look what it's got inside of it, a little universe, a portable universe. This directory can be copied to a static web server and everything will work just fine. It's spitting out a lot of stuff that was under different parts of the site. So for example, public has all these images and stuff that get copied over into the build area. One thing to keep an eye on from a WebStorm perspective is we index things. That's why everything is so awesome. Well, you don't want to index the build output and get 2 hits when you start asking for autocomplete. So I want to mark this directory as excluded. And not only will it improve the accuracy of my autocomplete and navigation and not give me false blips, it will not re-index that stuff in build each time I rebuild the universe. Okay, so that's a production build. I ran it in a tool window via running it from package.json, and I got a build output directory. One other thing that I could do is take a look at running tests. So for example, here's a test. It's using the jest test runner. That's what Create React App uses out of the box. It doesn't really add too much other stuff like enzyme or the testing library. If I want to run these tests, I can go back to my package.json, and here's a script, test. And it runs React scripts with an argument of test, come to the gutter, run test, and it cranks up, and it says, all my tests pass. Actually, I didn't say that because none of my tests have changed. Let's go change a test. I'm going to put in expect 1 to be 2. And when I save, the watcher says, hey, we had a failing test. And if I go back, put 1 in, I've got something wrong in my setup tests. This is what happens when you React 16 adapter. All right, well, we will continue without this in action. This is something that happens with the latest and greatest Create React App output. All right, so I'll close that. And before going on to the next step, we will pause for a moment and see if we have any questions.
Yes, we have a question. Why WebStorm doesn't actually exclude the build directory from the project automatically? That's a good question. And we should probably do that for the apps created with the Create React app when we know that for sure. But in general, the idea is that some people use the build folder as an output folder. Some people call it dist, some people call it output. So it's very hard to guess what people actually mean. Is it the output code or something else, or something used for build, for example, some build scripts? What WebStorm actually does, if you have a Webpack configuration file in your project and you have there the output directory specified, then WebStorm will understand that and exclude the folder automatically. But in Create React app, everything is hidden inside the React scripts folder modules, so it's hard to guess. But yeah, good point. We should exclude build directory in this case automatically as well. There's a comment suggesting that probably the issue is caused by the watch mode with the tests.
All right, so that is hidden. Yeah, we're going to hope that's true. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to making a run configuration. And hope that you are correct, because there I get to control the watch. I'll try without putting a watch configuration. My apologies, everyone. This worked last week. Nope.
No.
I'm using the out-of-the-box Create React app.
Yeah, we'll try to Google that.
All right. So Kathy, if you'll look that up and see if you or anyone in the audience can find the invariable ticket that explains that just when I said create React app does everything, all the janitorial wiring for us. I'll agree with Daniel. This is me all the day. Yes, this is me all the day too. As soon as you put TypeScript into the equation, you are in a different lane when it comes to React, and things can get weird. All right, so I will continue. I will go back to, I'll close that. Come back, close that, come back to start. And I'm going to go on to the next tutorial step, which is project cleanup. We're going to remove some things from the example that we're doing and show a couple of more features in both React and in the IDE. So for example, I'm going to go back to my test code. And I'm going to reformat the code. It's got 2 tabs. I think I'm set up to 4. I could manage all of that myself. And let's say that there's like extra lines and stuff like that, and things are indented differently. I could manage it myself, but instead I will reformat code. Let me turn on descriptions of actions so you can see the keys that I'm doing. I can reformat the code and let the IDE be the janitor that does that kind of work for me. And I can also go back to my app and do the same here. You see that it's got some different things that aren't formatted correctly. Reformat code, it puts everything the way it's supposed to be. Notice it added the semicolon. I had a warning about an unterminated statement. I did reformat code and it terminated a statement for me. Why did it do that? Let's go take a look. In the IDE, I go to, I'll type semicolon. And I'll go to code style TypeScript, and this pane is like uber important for keeping your sanity if you are an OCD person. I'm going to tell it to use semicolons to terminate statements always, not just in new code, but always. I'm going to say single quotes, and I'm going to say always. And what this means is even if I change this to double quotes, if I reformat, it's going to put single quotes for me. I don't have to think about those petty little details. The IDE will do it for me. Reformat code, I've joked with Kathy a couple of times. I do this even when I haven't typed anything, just to convince my brain that I'm still working sometimes. It's a little embarrassing. I don't need all this stuff for the demo that I'm going to give, so I'm going to take out the boilerplate that was created by Create React App, and I'm going to put in an H1, something really simple to reason about, and I'm going to use the emit system to do the markup for me. So div H1 tab, and it does the opening, closing things for me. Hello, React. And so now I have a much simpler basis to get started in. Now, the IDE is telling me, hey, you've got an import up here. Let's say that my cursor is still here. You have an import up here that you're not using. Oh, I'll stop. I'll go to the top. Well, instead of getting out of your flow, let the IDE clean that up for you with the other keystroke you do 100 times a day, optimize imports. Optimize imports will take your imports, remove things that are unused, combine things that are from the same target, and sort them in the order that you have specified in your settings. Now, I've got an app.css over here that I'm no longer using, so I could delete it. So let me see what happens if I delete it. Note I've still got this import up here. I want to get rid of the app.css because it's not really part of the demo. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to use safe delete and say, all right, yeah, safe delete. Oh no, you have a problem. You're still using that file that you were trying to delete. Well, what file is it? Okay, it's there. Oh, all right, that's the file, and it's used here. Oh yeah, you're right. Okay, so I will close that. I'll get rid of this import, and now when I go to delete that file, safe delete will be okay with it. And so that's a really helpful thing. I also have a logo that I'm not using. And so I'll delete that. It will look, and it will also find I think, no, it's not being used because I deleted it from here. It's not in the index.tsx. All right, so that's a place where the IDE can help you in refactoring, which is important in React because they want you to do lots and lots of teeny tiny little self-contained components. And as you move things around and refactor, you will leave behind fossils. And it's good to clean up for yourself. What's something else in doing React? I might go ahead and start writing a component and forget to do the import statement. Without importing React, JSX TSX is invalid. And it warns me right here. The IDE is warning me, WebStorm is saying, hey, you're referencing something that hasn't been imported. I could stop. I could go to the top of my file, find the right place to put the import. Or I could say, hey, IDE, Alt-Enter, go do that for me. And it will put the correct import from the correct target in the correct location, sorted everything at the top. So that's really nice. That is a mode that I'm always in. When I want to use something, I don't import and then use it. I start typing and let it autocomplete. And the autocomplete will not just autocomplete, but it will, yeah. All right, I got that example overlapped with some other things that were in there. All right, so we've got the import generated. Let's say I'm doing some more refactoring. I'm moving things around in my React app. And app, maybe I don't like that name. Maybe I think my app is a better name. So I start thinking about typing it, and then I think, wait a second, it's used here, and I have to change it there. And I don't even know where else it's used. I could maybe find usages, find out all the places that the IDE thinks it's used. Oh, wow, it's used in the test. It's used in index.ts. Oh, I'm not going to change it. Forget it. Let the IDE do the work for you with refactor rename. I'm going to call this my app. And you can see as I'm typing on line 11, the export default is getting fixed. So I hit enter. Do you really want to change it? Well, this is an important point because in the world of React, there's a convention that the default export, that name should also be the file name. And WebStorm is saying, hey, you know, I see you're doing something. Do you want me to change that file for you? And I say, yes. It renames, it tells me what it's going to do. I let it do the refactor. And it's renamed the file and done the correct VCS thing with it, which is really nice. And in fact, maybe it also fixed all of my imports. Let's go see a place that it's used, which is in index.ts. See, look, it fixed my app, the symbol, and my app, the file name, and it probably did the same thing in the in the test. It did the same thing. Now maybe you decide, oh, I should mention you don't have to go to the source to do a refactor rename. You can go to one of the usages, do refactor rename, and it will change the declaration as well as all the usages. Now let's say that you do that and you're like, oh wait, crap. That was stupid. Now I have to put the letters MY in front of everything that I ever do. Put it back. And then you think to yourself, oh my God, so I got to go find all the places that did this, do a VCS change, a file name change. Oh my God. Wouldn't it be great if I could just undo that entire unit of work and let the IDE rename the file, rename the symbol, put everything back in VCS the way that it was supposed to be. That's a really helpful example of many of the things the IDE can do to help you as you're trying to do refactoring and renaming and stuff. So I will pause at that step and see if there are some questions.
Yes. Can you please show how can one configure code style settings for the imports that IDE automatically adds? So for example, if it uses single or double quotes, if there are white spaces inside the curly braces, and so on.
Right. So is this the screen you're talking about?
Yes. So this one part of that and
code style TypeScript.
Yeah, and also the punctuation tab for the quotes and other stuff.
Yeah, but just remember that the JavaScript and TypeScript code settings are different.
Yeah.
And maybe you could explain from an editor config perspective. Do you know if any of these are covered by editor config files?
Yeah, sure. So so the editor config is a single file that allows you to like describe the code style options you are using in your project, and then different IDEs and editors can understand this format and use that to reformat your code. So in WebStorm, you can actually also create this file, and apart from some common options specified by editor config itself, starting with version 2019.2, you can also import all the JetBrains like IDE specific code style options and like define them in the editor config file as well. So it's a bit complicated, but yeah, in general, if you have editor config that says like use single quotes, the IDE should respect that and yeah, just use this style when reformatting your code.
All right, I am testing something that Ludwig suggested to test. And let me go see if watch mode now is safe.
Yeah, I guess if you decide not to use enzyme, the problem should go away.
Okay, this is going to be a short demo. Okay, so thank you, Ludwig. That worked by getting rid of what they previously told you to do, which is add a setuptests.ts file for enzyme. But now I have no enzyme. So if someone out there could do a little research and see what is the latest, greatest way to have the enzyme adapter loaded in a TypeScript create React app project, and you have maybe about 15 minutes to figure it out. So I'll continue. Let's see. So I'm going on now to the testing step, but this doesn't. Oh yeah, this is the step that expects to have enzyme in it. Kathy, before going on, is there anything else that you see in the questions that we need to handle?
Not yet, but actually I have an idea. Do you have typings for enzyme installed?
I did. Well, I'll show it
So
in
in
the
package.json, do you have at types?
Yeah, I did this. And so I will go over to package.json and see. And let's see, here are the dependencies I added. I said they were dev dependencies, but I put it there anyway. I must have forgotten.
Yeah, you
that
don't
part.
have, so maybe that's.
Aha! All right. Then maybe I was in the wrong directory when I did this. If so, yarn and -t. Maybe I can go back and add. You saved the circus if this is what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, let's double check that it actually added in the package.json.
Okay.
I think the problem was with the new line, because you have in the tutorial package on the second line, and when you copied that, that's my guess.
Got it.
Fingers crossed.
We will claim that we knew this would happen. We are just recreating the typical React user experience, right? So here are my dev dependencies. So I have them now. And I will go to my run configuration. I will restart you so that I have all of that. And let's hope that, that my tests are working. So let's get back on track. Thank you very much for that, Katya and Ludwig and the others that helped. That last line about undefined, I believe in later versions that can be removed, but I don't want to mess with it right now. I will confirm it when I update the tutorial and remove that as something that's necessary. Okay, so we want to talk about testing and about Jest, and what we just showed was instead of running the tests in a tool window like this, an NPM tool window, what we want is the visual testing tool, this thing that gives me the really integrated, the IDE experience for testing. And the way that I did it was, and I'll come here this time, edit configurations, and I added a run configuration of type Jest. And it produced a name of all tests. The only thing that I added was something kind of suggested in the placeholder, a flag to Jest saying, watch and rerun all the tests, not just the tests that have files that have changed. So whenever anything changes, run everything, which gives me a nice development experience. If I'm sitting in a test and I say I have a test that's running and then it fails, this really integrated visual testing environment gives me something down here telling me exactly what fails, gives me lots of knobs for hiding the things that pass, showing everything, rerunning things, etc. It gives me a little squiggly telling me exactly what line failed, and it gives me the options to run just one test or to run tests under the debugger, which we will talk about later on. So very handy, very useful experience for a concept called fail faster. You want your tools and you want TDD to help you fail faster. As part of fail faster, I'm going to add a new test. It's an arrow function. And I'm going to make a div. And in fact, I will, let's see, I'll copy this line. No, actually what I want to do, that's not the one I want to do, one a little bit further down. Let me go backwards a little bit. Before showing the next test, I want to talk a little bit about TDD, test-driven development. It's the way you're supposed to work. It's the way, it's kind of an eat your vegetables before you eat dessert. Well, I like to eat dessert first. I do TDD not because it's the adult supervision thing to do, but because it's actually a better way for me to work. I don't like switching over to the browser 57 times, going to a terminal window to look at the output of something, opening the debugger to see a console log statement or something. What I want is to split vertically, close this, and have my application code on the left, my test code on the right, and my test output at the bottom. That tells my brain you are in TDD mode. And now I can start adding features by writing failing tests. It renders the heading. And I'm going to make something from Enzyme. I haven't imported this. I want the IDE to import it for me. It adds the import on line 4 to import from Enzyme. And I'm going to have it make an instance of the app component. And then I expect the wrapper.find of h1 and its text to be hello React. When I save this, the tests are going to run. The thing is down here watching. What's going to happen when I save this? Tests are going to run, and that test is going to pass because I have hello React in it. I should have written that test before I did the implementation. Let's give an example of what I was talking about TDD. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to add a feature that has a paragraph in it. And this paragraph is going to have some text in it that says, nice TDD. When I save this, what's going to happen? It's going to fail. because it didn't find any nodes which matched that find specification. This red squiggly tells me exactly where the problem is. This gutter icon tells me which tests fail. And now I know, oh yeah, I gotta come over here and I gotta put nice TDD exclamation. When I save, all of my tests run again and all of my tests pass. I just did TDD. I wrote a failing test and then I wrote the implementation to implement the thing that was previously failing. And then every time I save, a couple of seconds later, I'm going to get visual input about whether I'm on track or off track. I will stop at this point. Got anything coming in or any comments you want to add?
No, I think we are more or less good. There was a question about using the quad style options defined in ESLint or Prettier, and if it's possible to somehow say the IDE to use these options. Yeah, can you comment on that?
Yes, here in the package.json, we have an ESLint config line. And that says the ESLint configuration for this is actually going to come from this package. And we could then add our own custom rules at this point. And one of the things that happens at startup, I deleted it. There's a little message that tells you, hey, we discovered ESLint and we're configuring things. The issue here is that React app doesn't really add too many settings. I think it's based maybe on ESLint recommended, another package. So there isn't that much to change. But if you add some rules in here, if you open a project with a package.json that has some rules in it, or has a .ESLint RC, and you open that file, WebStorm will put a little notice at the top saying, would you like to import some stuff, particularly for Prettier. It will detect that you're using Prettier, and it'll say, do you want to use the styles you've defined in Prettier, which is much more about styling than ESLint is. And it will go find the settings that the IDE overlaps with, and it will change those to be driven by your Prettier configuration file or your ESLint configuration file. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, that was perfect. One tip from me is that if for some reason you haven't seen that notification Paul mentioned, or you change the code style, like change the roles, if you right click on the package.json file with ESLint config field, or on the ESLint configuration file, there should be an action called like apply code style settings from. And this is the one that will trigger this import.
Yes, here it is.
Yeah, this one. Yeah. And it will then import the overlapping options. So which will not be like, yeah.
It will probably change this on me, right?
Yeah, it could, yeah, depending on your configuration, yeah.
Yep.
But I think, yeah, in React application, they don't enforce using any specific code style. Yeah. So in this case, it won't actually import anything.
It's an interesting point about the React ecosystem. Everything you read out there says use Prettier, use Prettier, use Prettier, but Create React app doesn't give you Prettier by default because they're trying to be, I guess, kind of conservative, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And maybe the moment they switch to Prettier is the moment the Prettier project closes and everyone switches to something else. Like what happened with TSLint. Okay, we're going to go on to the next step. We're going to talk about debugging. And in this case, debugging with Node.js. The next step, we will talk about debugging using the Chrome engine. And the idea for this is we have in the IDE, we have a visual test runner. And it's great. It's integrated. It's not some other window. Everything makes sense. All the keystrokes that you're used to work, all that stuff. You know what else we have? We have a visual debugger. And a lot of time in testing, you are poking around blindly no idea what you're doing, and you need to do a little bit of help. What does everybody do? Console.log. Except this is the world of jest. It intercepts output. You probably will not be very productive using console log. Instead, you run your tests under the debugger, and you can put a breakpoint, stop wherever you want, continue, inspect variables. That's what we're going to show in this case. So I'm going to remove this line since we don't really need it. And in this step, we're going to parameterize our heading. What we want is something that says instead of hello React, we can pass a different name into it. So I'm going to export an arrow function called label, and it's going to return for now hello React. Watch what I do here. Rather than completing the semicolon and the next line semicolon and a line after that, I just reformat code and get what I want. I could also change my settings in WebStorm to put this extra line here. And now I can say label. When I save, what's going to happen with my tests? Oh, wait, yes, I need that out of the way. When I save, what's going to happen with my tests? Well, they're going to pass because I didn't really change the surface area to have something different about what's the return value. And I kind of broke the rules because I didn't do TDD. I wrote this function and it is individually testable. I should have written a failing test first. So let me go ahead and write a test now. I'm going to say it generates a label arrow function. Arrow function. And I'm going to go get label and run it. Now, when I hit enter, it's going to generate the import on line 3 for me. I'm going to close it, and I'm going to expect L to be hello React. I need to fix the wrong it. When I save, the tests run, and it works fine. I want to make a point about what we just did, though. We took something that was in a component, in a React component, in JSX, which could only be looked at through kind of a DOM rendering. You needed a DOM, JS DOM in this case, not a browser DOM. You needed a DOM, you needed to render a component, you needed to do 57,000 lines of execution in order to get that string back. We moved it out of the component into plain old TypeScript and exported the function so that we could write a dirt simple test and made everything a lot faster and a lot easier. So now I'm going to implement the feature. I want the name to be passed in and capitalized. So I will say React, and then it's going to fail, and it failed faster because TypeScript warned me that I passed in an argument, but that argument wasn't expected. So I will go make the argument expected. I'll say it expects name, and then here I want to use a template string, which means I got to stop and change the tick to a back tick. No, the IDE can replace it with a template string for you. Thanks, WebStorm. And now I say name, autocomplete. And as long as I pass in a name here, everyone's happy. I run it, test run, test pass. But I got a red squiggly. What's up with that? Because TypeScript, I've got my TypeScript configuration to yell at me if I don't provide any typing information. And in this case, name is a string, and I need to put :string on it. Again, janitorial work, wouldn't it be great if the IDE had an intention to infer the type and put the type information for me? Thanks, WebStorm. So now when I save, the test still pass. Let's make the tests fail by implementing this feature. I expect this to be uppercase. When I save, it fails because it's not giving me something back in uppercase. I need this to be to uppercase. And because I said that this was a string, the IDE says, oh, strings have methods like to uppercase, and it really helped me on that. So this was a case where I wrote a test, wrote a function, moved functionality out into that function, cleaned up some tests, put some typing information. I failed faster. One last point about failing faster, and then this gets us into the debugger. Let's say I said 42, okay? And I save, and the tests fail. I've been working all day long. I'm exhausted. What the hell are you telling me? I know this works. It just worked a second ago. Why are you so dumb? Well, in this case, you know, the IDE is helping me fail faster. It failed before the test even ran. It gave me a red squiggly that told me exactly what the problem is, and then some more squigglies about what the problem is and all that other stuff. But let's say I'm really dense. This isn't working for me. I want to poke around. Well, I could sprinkle console log statements all over the place. That probably wouldn't help. Instead, I'm going to put a breakpoint. And because this is using Jest, the test runner Jest, it's using JSDOM as the browser engine, a browser engine implemented in JavaScript, which means I can run everything inside the Node.js debugger simply by clicking here and saying debug. And it will fire up the Jest test runner in a debug tool window, and it will get to that line. And I said only run that one test, so it's only running this one test. It's stopping on the line with the breakpoint. And I can say to myself, okay, I'm in the ballpark now. I'm going to smart step. Smart step into that function. It's going to go to that line in my code. I'm staring at it. I see 42. I still can't figure out what's wrong. Why is this not working for me? I'll highlight it. I'll say evaluate expression. Make this a little bit bigger. And I get a little window where I can poke around in the JavaScript interpreter on that line of execution with all of the scope values and everything in the frames that got there using the visual debugger, which ships in WebStorm. And I can say evaluate, and it tells me the same problem. And I can say, okay, this is getting old. What is name? It's 42. And then I can say, okay, what is type of name? Oh, it's a number, and numbers don't have an uppercase function. And thanks to the visual debugger combined with visual testing and stepping into the code and poking around, I saved myself a lot of time and a lot of frustration. I will stop at that point and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, we have one question. So Alex is asking, how would you test label function if it was a private method of app?
In fact, in my tutorial is class-based, and I had to change it to be, since Create React App made function components, I wasn't able to make a method on a class, but this is the way it would look. As you can see, I don't have private on there, which means I believe from the perspective of a test, you couldn't access it. But I believe if you did protected, maybe you could. But I think protected might be only within the scope of the class. So it's a reasonable question about the kind of interface, no TypeScript pun intended, the interface you get to poke around from the perspective of a test, which is kind of like what the outside world sees. So if you put private on it, you're telling the outside world you don't get to see this. And therefore you can't import it in a test. You would have to put something in here that had access to it, and then you could test that thing. Alex, feel free to tell us that that was a non-answer, and I will try again.
Yeah, thanks. And now another question. Why did you choose test-driven development over behavioral-driven development?
That is a good question. I believe the asker of the question probably is a right-brained person and I'm a left-brained, or vice versa. I'm really intrigued by BDD, and I know a lot of people that swear by it, but, and this is like the cardinal rule in the world of front-end development, the person who strays too far off the road gets eaten by the wolves. And BDD is not very popular. Create React app does not ship out of the box with BDD support. And when you mix in TypeScript with BDD, that combination means invariably you'll do an update one day and stuff will stop working. That's not a very useful answer, but apologies. I wind up being pretty conservative and staying in the pack.
Yeah, great answer. Thanks.
Spoken by the person who has to drive the WebStorm ship, right? All right, let me put that back to this, and we will cover one more thing and then call it a day and talk about what we will do in part 2. I just showed debugging in Node.js. I'm going to show quickly debugging in the actual browser engine. Sometimes you need, either for sanity purposes, or you're using some API that isn't available in JSDOM and you want to run in Chrome. But you want to keep that whole stay in the flow developer experience that the integrated development environment in IDE gives you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing we just showed, but instead of running it under Node.js, we're going to run it in the browser. And the way I do that is, first I will create a run configuration. I do it this way. I'm going to add a JavaScript debug run configuration. And I'll say Chrome tests, and the URL is going to be, let me stop that. I'm going to go back to the run tool, and I'm going to turn off the Node.js test runner, go back to here, and I'm going to copy this. And this is the URL that we went to that was running our app. And so I'm going to go in my run configuration. I'm going to add a run configuration. I'm going to say it is of type JavaScript debug, Chrome tests, and I'm going to put that URL here. It needs to run in Chrome for reasons I will let the WebStorm PMM explain in just a moment. By default, it says Chrome, but I'll also make it manual, right, for a moment. And I will not run right now. So now I have a run configuration. I can see it here, Chrome tests. I have a run configuration, and I want to debug and stop at this breakpoint in Chrome. How will I do that? I will, instead of running Chrome tests, I will debug Chrome tests. It's going to run. It's going to pop up a private copy of Chrome. You see down here, I now have 2 Chrome instances running. It created a new profile with no universe of history in it. And now if I reload, am I in the wrong browser? I think I might need to close this. Oh, yes, it ran and it stopped. That's why. So I'm going to, let's see, debug this. All right, that's not what I wanted. What I need to do, how do I get myself stuck here? I need to run Chrome tests in debug. And then when I reload, it's supposed to stop here. Kathy, can you spot why I'm not stopping there? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. What does the debugger tab says in the debugger tool window?
I am making the mistake of using, no, I'm not using the AP.
Yeah, can you switch to the debugger tab in WebStorm in the debug tool window here? That's weird. Let's try some simpler function that with probably some on-click handler and see if it works.
All right.
Yeah, because sometimes like it's a bit hard for WebStorm to actually stop in the code that is executed when you load the page.
Yeah,
because
I mean,
it has
exactly
to get
right.
but
Yeah,
actually after like reloading the page, it most often works, but not in this case for some reason.
All right. It's clearly my fault. I'm doing something wrong on this. We have it working in the previous webinars. And if you come back for part 2 in December, I will show this working correctly. Definitely my fault. All right, let's turn over and talk about what we're going to do in part 2 and then wrap this up since we've gone a little bit longer than expected. We're going to get into a little bit more of React and TypeScript stuff. So this step really talks about putting the power of the modern JavaScript landscape, object destructuring, et cetera, to use. Some pretty cool stuff about functional components in TypeScript and how to share props with interfaces so that you can fail faster and get red squigglies. Same thing with class components and prop information with interfaces, how to model state, the second argument to the generic using interfaces. And then this one, the fun one, how to go and simulate things like browser events. All right, with that in mind, before going to the closeout, let's see, do we have any other questions or any points you want to go over?
Not really. Yeah, it's a pity that debugger didn't work, but yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I use it constantly, so this is just something I did dumb during today's demo. My apologies. Okay, so with that in mind, thank you everyone for attending today. We went through a lot of material. We have a lot more to go through. We have a tutorial that you can go to and take a look at yourself if you want to go for a deep dive on some of the material. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us about React, TypeScript testing, this idea of fail faster, staying in the flow. If you have any questions, reach out to us by email or social media. If you'd like more information on WebStorm, go to our website at jetbrains.com/WebStorm. We'd love your feedback on this webinar, so please feel free to contact us on Twitter or in the after webinar survey. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel soon. If you haven't already, please check out our WebStorm blog where you can find up-to-date WebStorm news about releases and events, in addition to educational resources. So for example, the recording of this webinar will be published there in a few days. We'll also provide some additional links and information on the presentation on the blog itself. Now, one final plug. In this wild world of front-end development, if it's your kind of thing, make sure you follow WebStorm on Twitter. Katerina, you do a wonderful job on bite-sized productivity tips. I'm amazed at how many you crank out, how good they are. How do you keep up with it?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, so I use WebStorm a lot myself, and I try to share tips with our followers every time I learn something new and cool about WebStorm. And we also have quite a lot of new and very useful features added to the IDE with every release. So we have a lot of new stuff to talk about and share with you. And of course, we often have some inspiration coming from our users, be that a question or a tip that you share with us. So we'd be happy to retweet that and or like provide an answer in the next tip. Yeah, so
Take her,
follow us. Yeah, it's WebStorm IDE on Twitter, WebStorm IDE. Yeah.
take her up on the offer. I don't know, are you soliciting new ideas for tips?
Sorry?
Are you soliciting new ideas for tips?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for staying to the end of the webinar, and hope you have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.